Okay, tonight we are going to be discussing how to plant trees, and we're fortunate to have with us Melissa Gildea, who is now the urban forester, one of the urban foresters with Arlington County, and she's done just a great job. What I really love about Melissa is that she keeps up to date on the research, as well as I'm finding out that what I learned 20 years ago is not totally true. I have to admit that when I took tree steward training, they were still telling us that when we planted, we should cut off any of the extra branches on the tree we were planting so it would match the roots below that were smaller. And I was shocked, I tell you, shocked to find out that this is no longer the case. So I learned something new every time. And Melissa, I will turn it over to you to share your screen.
Let me just make sure I'm sharing the right thing.
Okay, I don't see it yet.
Yeah, no, not yet. I just, so here we go. Can you see it?
I can. And if you just do it in, what is it? The slideshow, there it is. Great. Go. Hey, that's us, isn't it?
There you are in Alexandria, though. Tree planting is very near and dear to my heart. I live in a world of horticulture geeks. If the farther that you get into something, the less you feel like you know. And so what I'm going to talk today is not about all the ways that you can do something, but really the best practices. So best practices are, you can plant 99% of the time, you'll have success. And so I haven't given this before. It's probably a little incomplete. I appreciate you all being here with me, and I can be a little bit of an energizer bunny, and so feel free to questions. And if anyone, I'm not like Vincent. I can't read your comments in the chat and talk at the same time. So if somebody wants to read those or ping in, that would
Melissa, I will be following the chat and getting questions to you. So don't worry, you don't have to watch them.
Okay, thank you. So tree planting is interesting, because you think an arborist would know about tree planting, but it's its own little special thing. And I've been doing this for a really long time, 40 years now, and there's almost nothing that's exactly the same as when I started. And every time that I talk about it, I have to look it up and make sure that it's still right. So you're not the only one, Nora.
Okay.
What do you need to plant a tree? You need the right tree, the right spot, the right time, the right tools, the right hole, your best practices. And let's see, I'm going to turn this off so it's not on top of it. And then and the right aftercare. So tree planting is really about growing a tree and not just getting it into the ground. So that's just the first step. So I'm not talking about the right tree and the right spot. That's another class. So we're going to start with the right time. So you've planned your perfect planting spot and your perfect tree. but what's the right time? So best practices are that you want to plant your tree when it's not when it's coming out of dormancy, and that it has about, a long period of relatively stress-free weather. And so the fall is always something people talk about. Fall is a great time to plant. And it is. It's a great time to plant. Usually the weather's cooler, there's less moisture stress, except for last year when it didn't rain for months and months and months. So there's no guarantees ever, but at least the weather's cooler in the fall. We do have something called fall hazard. You know what fall hazards are? You see, I call them so-called fall hazards. Fall hazards are trees that there are species that they just don't prefer to go through a winter period, and they don't acclimate well. And so fall hazards usually have a certain kind of characteristic. So one of the kind is a fibrous root system, a limited root system. And so that would be the oaks. So most of the oaks have trouble in the fall. Not all of them. Pin oaks don't, and we can plant a few other oaks that like wet soils with pretty good success, but they don't make hair roots in the fall, and so they don't make it over the winter very well. Other kinds of trees are that don't make it over the winter are ones with fleshy roots, like cottonwood and magnolia. Trees with fine textured stems, because they get dry from the cold, windy weather, and especially if the ground is frozen. So that would be like a birch or a hornbeam. And then, so we have fleshy roots, fibrous roots, thin, and then evergreens. So evergreens have a lot of trouble. Does anybody have any guess as to why evergreens have so much trouble? Come on, just a wild guess. Has something to do with evergreen, that they're evergreen. Evergreens are hold their leaves all winter, and since they don't acclimate to the winter by dropping their leaves and saving moisture, that the leaves are pulling water out of the ground all winter long, and that can cause them to get really dry. So they might drop all their leaves. Sometimes they die back to the ground. So transplanting evergreens late in the fall is a bad idea. So you want to try to get your evergreens dug in late August. That's when they're usually dug. They're not dug later than that because it makes them push growth and then they're not acclimated for the winter. Try to get them in the ground by October, and whether they're potted or dug. Some people you can plant through the winter, but this is a best practices talk. So it's always much riskier, and the moisture issue is much greater. But we generally do water evergreens in the winter if they're newly transplanted.
Melissa, we
Mhm.
have 2-star tree steward trainees
Great.
who actually answered that. And
Wow.
with ice and snow and poor transpiration of leaves due to desiccation because of frozen soil, which is partly true. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
that's very, very true. You know, if you have a snow cover, you're much better off. But I always try to make sure everything's wet going into a cold snap, because if it freezes, then the ice insulates it, and then the roots won't. It's a really weird, you know, ice is a good insulator, and if it's dry, then the moisture can cause the roots to burst. But if they're wet going in, then usually they're fine. That's a little different if evergreens get a lot of snow on them and they're not acclimated. Sometimes their leaves can burn off. But so the best practices, the time frame is mid-September to Thanksgiving, generally, with exceptions. Now, everyone knows that we plant into January in the county, and we're taking that risk. And the reason why we're taking that risk is because we have to wait to dig the trees until they're fully dormant. And so the leaves have to drop. And once we get them, it's already Thanksgiving. And so we're just planting them after we get them. And we weren't able to get them all in the ground before it snowed last year. So we're still planting our fall trees right now. So mid-September to Thanksgiving, with exceptions, and deciduous trees can go a little bit longer. Does that make sense?
it does. I think you're getting ready to tell us about spring planting, though.
You think? Let's see. Earlier is better. Okay. So I said before, you always want to plant when things are coming out of dormancy. A fall planting, you're coming out of summer dormancy. Plants go dormant, depending on the species, about when the temperature hits 85, 88, 90, depending on the species. So they're just closed down their stomata, the cells in their leaves, and they sit there, and so you can overwater because they're not drawing water as much. They just sit there and then they wait for it to cool off. So fall planting is at the end of summer dormancy, and that's a period of fast growth. Spring planting is the end of winter dormancy. So earlier is better. Before bud break is best. Plant as soon as it's dug or in any container. Once the buds start expanding, you can run into some trouble, and you have to wait until the leaves are all the way hardened off. And hardening off is acclimatization again. The shoots are no longer tender, so you're waiting for the leaves to be mature to plant. So you plant really early, or then you have to wait for a little bit. And that's our spring planting. Now, June 16th is our stop date, generally in horticulture. But what that does is that puts a tree right into summer without having any roots. So the earlier you can get something in, the better. Oh, I should say that the weird thing about planting evergreens that are dug B&B in the spring is that they're not dug until June. If you dig them too early, they drop their leaves. So that's kind of a weird evergreens are, especially hollies, are different. So, okay, all ready to go. But what about the weather? So any questions? I've got 4, I see 4.
Oh, what is B&B and what is container?
Oh, that's a great question. So,
Isn't it?
so Actually, there's a whole lot of ways that you can buy trees. So you can buy trees in bags. You can buy trees in plastic pots, which we call container. And you can buy them in grow pots, which have slots down the side that are open. And those expose the ends of the roots to the air. And then you can buy them B&B. And B&B means balled and burlap. And so there's a machine that scoops them out of the ground. And another one puts the basket on and puts the burlap on and then the basket. And that's how you buy it. So they generally have a metal basket around them. That started in the 70s, believe it or not. It started before that, but widespread use in the 70s. So that's interesting. Any other questions?
Someone said, how early in the spring can you plant? And I've always thought it was as long as the ground isn't frozen.
Yeah, that's right. Now, you can plant in January, you can plant in December. What happens is that until the ground gets up to about 55 degrees, you're not getting any root activity. Sometimes some people say higher than that. So that's pretty warm soil temperature. And so what you want to do is just to be aware that if you plant too early, really what's sitting, the tree's just sitting there being a little stressed and waiting. So that's
yes, especially if you've got them left over from the fall.
right. So what about the weather? So what's really important, especially in the soils around here, everybody says, oh, we have such terrible soils. We've got clay soils and we've got silt soils. We've got, these kind of fine textured soils. Yeah, they're not really that bad for growing things. What they're really bad about is getting compacted. You don't want to work in wet soil. And you should never work in soil that pumps. We call it pumping. And that's when you walk on it, it feels like you're walking, it's not so muddy that it's coming in on your shoes, but you can feel it moving when you're walking. So you don't want to be planting in soil that pumps. There's a technical term called above field capacity, but just remember, if it moves, don't plant. And if it's dry, then it's not very good either, because it takes so much to get water into it. But of course, we plant in dry soil all the time. You just got to add a lot of water. So for trees to get started really well, the optimum is to have 5 stress-free months of adequate moisture and temperate weather. And during their period of optimum growth, which is spring and fall. So why do you think that would help? Any thoughts? I'm sure there's thought here. Just let's see if I can try this.
What was the question, Melissa? I'm sorry, I was answering something. Why do you want it to be moist?
Yeah, you want it to be moist just because so roots penetrate a moist soil much more easily, right? A dry soil is harder for a root to penetrate. So it's just about how easy it is for things to grow. And also moist is the right texture for keeping roots. Roots need the moisture. So somebody asked, what's the difference between planting and why do you even plant in October if the soil temperature needs to be 55? So remember that, well, the air temperature is not equivalent to the soil temperature. So the soil temperature drops much more slowly than the air temperature, but it also is much wavier. So it's complicated, but it doesn't drop down really low for, a while. So now we're ready.
Oh, Melissa, I
Uh-huh.
think one thing people need to keep in mind is that if you as an individual are planting a tree in your yard, you can afford to wait for the exact time to get it in there and do it right. But if you've got 300 trees that have to be planted throughout the county, then you can't wait for that perfect day because you can't get all 300. So it's partly keep in mind that what we're talking about is the ideal situation, but still, I think you do 900 trees a year planting. So,
At least 900.
yeah, the timing is a lot different, and you probably plant earlier and push maybe a little later than you would really like.
Yeah, we don't ever get them in early. I think always it's later and later. Like it's
Yeah.
later in the winter and later in the summer than we would really like. So the trees are more stressed than they would be in your home. And that's typical, right? The way that it is in general is the most stressed tree is in an urban environment and the least stressed tree is out in the woods. So that's across the board how it is, with suburban being quite very wonderful, which means just in your yard. So you wouldn't buy these trees, I hope. There's not enough canopy and too much stem, a little tiny root ball. But this is what Baldwin burlap is, and these have little wire baskets on them. So so you're ready to move your tree to the hole, and so you should have the right tools. What you always want to do is carry it by the container. The nice thing about, we have this thing called ANSI standards, which you'll learn about when you're choosing a tree. But the B&B is the heaviest. It comes with a lot of soil. Trees and containers are usually grown in a special media. And then trees and bags don't have as much because they just get a better root system on them by being in those bags. The air prunes the roots and they're really nice. So they're easier to carry. So these are the heaviest, and you can use the ball cart. You can rent a ball cart. And I can move 900 pounds, and I'm very small. I'm pretty small. And so use a ball cart or put it on a tarp, roll it on a tarp by the ball, and then drag the tarp with help. And then always carry by the pot and not the stem. Does anybody know why you don't carry it by the stem? Don't carry a tree by the stem. Yes, there's the potential to break it.
Potential to break, yeah.
What's the average weight of a 2-inch caliper B&B tree? I think it's pretty heavy. I don't know average. I used to be able to pick up usually a little, like a 2-inch tree is 24 inches deep and 24 inches round. And I used to be able to pick it up like 120 pounds or more, but that's when it's not too wet. They're pretty heavy. And that's a very small tree.
Melissa, I have a question about that. I've always been curious because I understand you don't want to tear the roots, but if the roots, so many of the fine roots are going to be replaced later by the tree, then why does it matter if they die as you're planting?
It's a good question. The answer is really technical. So,
Oh, well, don't get
yeah.
into it then. Never mind. Just, I won't pick up the tree by the stem.
Yeah. So breaking the ball apart doesn't seem to hurt very much in the spring, and it hurts more in the fall. So it's just harder for the trees to replace it. Bonnie Appleton did a bunch of research where she picked up all the trees and just dropped them on the ground to see how they did.
Right. I
Yeah.
was there.
Yeah, and and you know, most of them did just fine. So what we're more concerned about is sandy soil, and breaking the roots right at the stem connection,
Mhm.
and breaking up the stems and banging up the stems. And in the fall, it's different. You want to be more careful. But what Nora's saying is that the hair roots turn over really constantly, but there has been research that does set the trees back a little bit. Right tools. Personally, I love a mattock. A good mattock is a great small person's tool because it has weight and it kind of digs a hole for you. And some of our soils can be really hard. I like a good fiberglass, nice sharp shovel. I like it so that I can jump onto it because I usually need to. And I also like a long lever arm. I'm not sure how many people have a nursery fork, but I find this to be a very useful tool for loosening soil without turning it. So now we
Whoa.
need to dig. We need to dig our $1 million hole for our $10 tree. So, you think that's big enough? How big? How wide? How deep? Not that deep. So width depends on the soil and the location, and depth depends on what you're planting. So how wide? Like I said before in the previous slide, depends on the soil and the location. So how do you know about the soil? How can you find out about soil? You
Pick it
lick
up in your hand.
it. Don't lick it. That was the old people used to do that though.
I know. Have to eat a
Yeah,
pound of dirt.
yeah. So yeah, pick it up and feel it. Learn how to do a ribbon test. If it crumbles, it's good. Don't get too stuck on the color. Clay soils are some of the most fertile soils in the world. So it's more about how slidey, slippery, platey it is. And so think of it that way. This is platey. Platey has lines. You pick it up and it's a flat chunk. It doesn't have any structure to it. It's compacted soil. This is the soil that you wish wasn't in your yard or along the street, but it usually is in the urban environment, what we're dealing with. So, and when you have platey soil, you need a little bit bigger hole. So do you double dig it? Oh, no, please don't double dig. We don't double dig anymore. I mean, some people do. I think some people still do, but we do a kind of a double digging thing with the soil profile rebuilding. So I'm going to suggest that rather than doing the laborious double digging, spread out a layer of compost, and then loosen the soil with your nursery fork or shovel and get it down in there. And that'll do it for you. So what is compost? Does anybody know what compost is? I'm looking for the compost. Organic material.
Would you explain more about what is double digging? Because we're used to digging and separating the clumps so that it's fine. And I don't think that's what you mean.
No. So no, it's all, so that's what double digging is. So double digging is very traditional. George Washington double dug his garden. They can, and soil retains marks, so they were able to see, the archaeologists could see that in the soil. Double digging is you dig a trench. It's the depth of your shovel, so about a foot deep or so. And then you put it to the side, put it all the way at the end, dig the next trench, put it on top, put the compost in the bottom, and you're filling the hole each time you dig it, and then you're breaking up all the clumps and making it really fine. So we found out that the thing that's very good about soil is not the loose soil. It's the structure. And usually soil, when it's compacted, isn't compacted really deep unless you're on a construction site. Usually 6 inches is about as deep as soil is compacted from feet. And so you can spread some compost across it and dig it up a little and just get it in there, and then just rake out the top. Don't break up all the clods. You can break it up a little just so you can rake it out, but what we call the clods now is PEDs, and now we know that they're more important, unless it's really platey. Compost is organic material that is fully decayed. So you would never mix in organic material that is not fully decayed into your soil, because then it has to decay and it's going to take all the oxygen out of the soil. So fully decayed compost. Otherwise, it's just organic material, and don't mix it in.
Melissa, this is another thing I'm learning tonight. The size of these chunks of dirt, like what are shown on the photo, are you saying that you would just push them aside and plant the tree and leave them rather than crumpling them all up?
If the soil is not platey, you don't have to break them all up.
Okay.
That's correct. You can break them up for aesthetic reasons, but not growing reasons. Because then the soil has what we call macropores that makes it much easier for water to go into it. So all the benefits, and then the tree roots keep the soil open. So it's great. It is not what we learned at all. We're still seeing screen topsoil show up to every job. So it's a new thing, a new change. 20 years, but it takes a while. So platey soil, dig a wide hole, 3 times the width of the ball. Okay, so we're just talking about how wide to do it right now. This is 3 times the width of the ball. You can use your nursery fork if it's got really heavy tines, and you can break it up a little bit, and the outer part can just be broken up.
So we're still having trouble accepting your thing about big clumps. One tree steward wants to know, but wouldn't there be huge air pockets if you aren't crumbling them? And another one wants to know, do you need to remove small rocks?
It depends on how many rocks you have. Rocks take up root space. So of course, you go to Grandfather Mountain in North Carolina, and there's trees everywhere, and it's just granite everywhere. So trees can grow in those kinds of conditions, but in your yard, if you have a whole bunch of gravel, it's going to compromise the root system. So taking out rocks, large rocks, sure, taking out large amounts of gravel, but if you just have little 1-inch rocks, leave them in the hole. The air pocket thing is all about contact. So we'll talk about that further on.
Okay.
And water helps.
Okay.
So crumbly soil, this is what you want. Probably smells pretty good. Smells very organic, has little root hairs in it, so you know it's good. This looks like it has high organics. It's okay if it's orange and crumbly, but not if it stinks. So if it smells really bad, some people call it ammonia or sulfur, then that doesn't mean the soil's bad, but it's a different strategy. I mean, it does mean the soil's bad. It means it's hydric. So if you have good soil, you can make a smaller hole. You can make your big hole 3 times the size of the ball, or you can make 2 times the size of the ball. So that makes it a little bit easier. But if you're in a woodland and you're planting, and I drew out these critical roots, these structural root zones of the trees right here.
That already exists, that are there.
Right. If I'm planting under tree canopy, I want to dig myself a $3 hole. So I want to dig the smallest possible hole, and I don't want to cut any roots bigger than 1 inch, and try not to cut anything except for hair roots, and just keep moving it around until I get my tree in the right place. You know, the trees aren't going to grow as well under tree canopy unless they're the same species, and then they'll probably root graft with the bigger trees. But you know, they're not getting as much water, they're not getting as much sun. So smaller trees go under big trees, and in the smallest hole possible. So this says just enough. Just enough. And I guess there's a little bit, yeah, smallest hole possible, and smallest tree possible. Okay, so how deep? Not this deep. This so in order to find out how deep, then we have to excavate the trunk flare until we find the fairy doors. I mean, no, we're just
oh, that's cute.
We're just going to look for the trunk flare. So what the trunk flare is all these are root connections. And so you see this always in nature, a tree that plants itself, unless it was flooded, the flood put some sediment on it, it's going to always have this nice, beautiful curve. That's what you want. That's where a lot of respiration takes place. This is a really critical point. So next step, carry, dig, set, backfill, mulch, stake, optional, and water. So let's look at the root flare, and that determines how deep we're planting. Or the trunk flare, it's not the root flare. The roots don't flare. So these are potted plants. And this is a really good root system, believe it or not. And these little nodules are just water storage knots. But this one over here is terrible. It has all of this matted roots and big woody roots. And honestly, if you pull something out like this and you've already committed and you can't turn it, then you need to cut all of these off. And it'll set that tree back a good bit. You need to be really careful with it. But better is to pull it out at the nursery and then or return it. Don't ever, you can take years to get out of this, and sometimes it never recovers never takes it into the soil. So this is a root wash tree, and the reason why I have this picture is because this is the most visible. You can see the trunk flare and where the major roots are connected, and that there's no guessing about where to plant. You're going to plant right there. So you're always looking for this. Before you plant, get into the pot, pull the soil out from the trunk, get into the ball, open up the top of the ball, take the string off, start working down the trunk very carefully, don't scratch it all up, and then you can use a little claw gently or spades. I do a bad thing, I use my pruner's claw. And just look for it, and don't even dig your hole very deep until you know where that is. And look at how deep that one was. So that's a balled and burlap tree that they took the burlap off the top, took the twine off the top, and there's, I don't know, 3 or 4 inches down. So you never want the structural roots to be more than 2 inches below the soil. So just look for that, and then and none of that stuff behind that was important. so once you find the trunk flare, then you can take your shovel, put your hand on the top of your shovel, measure how tall that is, and dig the depth of your hole. Okay, and I'm just gonna, so I'm gonna go out here for a minute and see where I am. I'm lost. Okay, so what happens if you start digging down and there's a whole bunch of water? And it stinks. Do you add gravel in the bottom of the hole? Anybody?
Well, we have a question asking that.
Mm-hmm.
I think I would just look for another place to plant.
Yeah, so that in an urban situation, you can have water sitting in a hole in one place and not right next to it, because the soil's really mixed from development. If you have an older yard, it might be better, but what you never want to do is put gravel in the hole, because if you have a layer of water, it's going to be the same depth from capillary action, and so all you're doing is raising up the wet zone when you put gravel in there. So you never put gravel as a drainage layer. You can put it around I'm not going to go into drainage right now, but people put it around pipes, but then that shouldn't be directly under your tree. It's called a perched water table, and it will cause a problem. But back to this is a natural wetland. This is what a wetland looks like. Natural wetlands have stinky soils. They have gray soils that stink. So if you end up with this kind of situation in your yard, then there's all kinds of trees that grow in wetlands, and you can avail yourself of those.
But wouldn't that hole be way too deep anyway? I mean,
Yeah.
It doesn't look like they were planting a tree.
Oh, no, they're doing wetland delineation.
Okay. All right, good. So there is a question. What if your crew gets overzealous with the digging the planting hole? How do you appropriately add material back in so that they can go ahead and plant there? And I have experienced that.
Me too. So usually the way they dig the hole is they put the junky soil on the top of the pile. And so take the junky soil, take the subgrade soil, the stickier soil, the oranger soil, put it back in on the bottom, and then just get in there and stomp on it.
Oh, you would tamp it down before
I
you,
would.
yeah.
Yeah, what you
Okay.
want to do is to tamp it down as much as you can. You want that to be nice and firm on the bottom. So the number one reason, I'm missing a slide here. Excuse me for a minute. I don't know where my slide went. Okay, let's just go back up here. So the number one reason why trees die is, well, two reasons: water and being planted too deeply. So that's why we need to find the trunk flare. There's nursery practices cause them to be buried all the time. And then we need to plant them at the appropriate depth. And you don't want them to settle. So if somebody was overzealous, then the detail, this is just a standard detail that goes out to contractors. You're always planted on unexcavated soil, planting on unexcavated soil. You would plant on unexcavated soil. If you overdid it, then you would tamp it down as firmly as possible. And in this case, in the poorly drained soil, you're almost a third of the plant out of the ground. Maybe 2 or 3 inches. See that? Then you take all of your soil and you can put it back on top, and you're building this little berm around it. And the berm is for what reason? It's to kill the tree, right?
Collect the water.
Yeah.
I thought it was just to use up the leftover dirt.
Yeah, that's what it is in the county now. It's what it is for is you dig it,
Really to hold the water, like someone says.
You hold it right on the ball. I've seen people put it out here. You're not holding the water on the planting hole. You need to hold the water right on the root ball, because that's where all the little hair roots are. That's where it's going to dry out until it grows into the soil. So it needs to be right at the edge of the ball. And then in this case, in poorly drained soil, this tree's out of the ground. And you go ahead and mulch right on top of that. In the other case of, let's see if I can find this one, you're still planting just a little bit. No, that's still that one. You plant maybe an inch out of the ground. Oh, that's the wrong one. Sorry, guys. The only difference is that this is about level with the grade, and you're not building this big berm up. So after you dig your hole the correct depth, because you have your root flare exposed, then you set it in very gently into the ground. You take it out of the pot first. So that means that you pull it out of the pot by the stem, right? No, usually you try to gently pull it out. You will have to pull a little bit on the stem, but you raise it up and try to slide it out, and you hold your hand over the ball. If it's really large, then you might need more than one person to do it. With a balled and burlap, you set it in the hole, then you take bolt cutters and cut 2 rings off about a third of the basket or more. And then you can cut the burlap down that far. And then you go ahead and backfill it. So what you're doing is you're putting the tree in the hole. You're taking a potted plant out of the pot, put it in the hole, tamp a little bit of soil around here with your feet. Some people don't do it like that, but then you often need to stake. So that's a choice. You can tamp with water or you can tamp with your feet. About 1/3 of soil. And then you, does anybody know, is that soil mixed with compost or not? Here's the big surprise. No compost in the soil. None in the soil. None of the backfill has anything but the soil you took out of the hole until you get right to the top. Especially if it's not fully, I mean, no matter what, but that's because the water flows differently. So then tamp this, make sure it's straight, then backfill it. You can mix well-rotted compost into the top 6 inches. If you have only organic matter like leaves, bark, just put it on top. It does a better job on top. Worms and ants will take it into the soil as it rots, and it actually migrates down pretty well, believe it or not. So no backfill of compost. Don't make that soil all gummy in there.
Melissa, I'd always heard that one reason you don't put compost in is that the tree roots will love the compost and won't want to go out of it and into the soil away from it. Is that true, or is it just the water?
No, it's true, but but the water is a large part of that being true. I mean, almost everything that happens with trees is because of available water. It's really interesting. So so we don't want the water to move differently. Compost really changes the way that the water moves. And yeah, it's just, they're gonna just circle around and and strangle. So let me say, let me show you this. So just for something else, how do you plant a tree on a slope? I teach this every season. I still can't get everyone to do it right. So this is the stem is in the middle of the slope. So start digging your hole. The only place that it's going to be at the trunk flare, the only place that's going to be the right depth is right on the slope, right even with the slope at the trunk. Then you're going to take some soil from uphill and excavate it backwards, and you're going to put it downhill. And what this little berm does, this berm only goes like a semicircle. It captures the water and keeps it from running off so fast, and it holds it over the ball. You can do that on a 50% slope. That's a really steep slope, but you're planting smaller and smaller trees as it gets steeper and steeper. So that's the critical thing to remember, is that the center of the tree is right at the original grade. And then you stake it in line with the center. So it's going up. The stakes aren't uphill or downhill, they're in line with the slope. So what about staking? Any opinions? No?
Oh, you tell us what you think, and then I'll give you my version of it.
Okay, so staking is really good for when done appropriately. You can use stakes to keep trees from falling over. You can, but staking is not to straighten a tree. The tree should have been planted straight. If a tree kind of gets crooked, it's really hard to straighten it with a stake. You usually have to dig it up at the bottom and straighten it. So, so this is different than training a tree in the nursery, but what we find and what I'm really good at, I've staked maybe 300 trees with wooden stakes, wire wrapped really tight with hose. And now we know that making a nice tight stake keeps the tree from moving. And a tree moving all the way down to the base is what stimulates the roots to grow. So you need the tree to be able to move in the wind. And so if you stake it really loosely, and I think that Nora has a technical term for that.
Yeah, I call it psychological staking.
But what it really is, it keeps it from falling over. And I just got a call that a tree fell over in a park. So you don't want that call, a live tree falling over. So when should you stake? When should you always stake? High winds, like the top of the hill in Alexandria over on Quaker Lane, all of that stuff needs staking. So high wind areas, evergreens, taller evergreens, if they're taller than 6 feet tall, they tend to catch a lot of wind and blow over. Big heads. So the classic nursery tree that's got a nice stem and a big lollipop head, really heavy foliage, they will blow over. And it's not a natural kind of thing. It's a thing that's done for the consumer to make it really tight and full. They will blow over. So those are times when you really want to stake, and still you don't want to stake too tightly. You might have to, you need to get some of that movement in there, and that's critical to root growth. And I also want to note here that, see all these little stems on this tree? Why would they leave all those little stems on there? Why does the drawing even have those little stems on it? Oh, yeah.
We heard that from Jim McLone. You have that on to collect the sunlight for, there it is, photosynthesis.
Yeah.
There, that's the word I was looking for.
Yeah, I see that people say mowers, and so I just planted a bunch of trees along Route 1. They're going to get 4 stakes. They don't need any stakes, but they need to be protected from the people. And so we're just wrapping, strapping around them. We're not even attaching it to the tree. And then mower burn, yeah, that's a really big one. We will put tree cages on, which, like deer cages, specifically for mowers. So all of those are good reasons to stake. And just again, that I like the strapping material, and it comes with a little note that tells you how to make a really good knot. And that's my favorite. I like it better than plastic. Plastic always seems to break and fall onto the ground. And then last, is that you put on your mulch, and the mulch is 2 to 4 inches, and it doesn't go all the way up to the trunk. What I like to say is I put it slightly on top of the ball and then whisper it over to the trunk. And 2 to 4 inches is wide range. And so I want to suggest to you that it matters very much what kind of mulch you're using. So a large particle size mulch, like arborist chips, or a larger pine chips, or leaves that aren't cut up too finely, you can put those on at 4 inches, and it's no big deal. And the smaller the particle, the more you worry about putting it on thick. And shredded hardwood bark mulch, I like it no more than 2 inches, because a lot of times it can be what we say is hydrophobic, that the water runs off the top. And so mulch and then fertilize, right? No. Don't fertilize. You don't fertilize for the first year, and then after that, what do you use as a key to fertilize?
You just leave the leaves.
Yeah, soil test is good. So
yeah,
a soil test is good if you have poor soils. You can fertilize just enough to make up for that. But for nitrogen, leaves are, a lawn needs 4 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. And that's about what you get from leaves. And trees have developed this whole system where they store all the nutrients, and then they drop the nitrogen on the ground, and they're fertilizing themselves. So I kind of, it's a very elegant system. So I do really like the leaves on the ground. So anybody have any questions? I think I kind of at the end here, I got stuck with this one slide.
Well, I just wanted to make the statement that tree stewards themselves rarely ever plant balled and burlap, because they are so incredibly heavy, like 300 pounds at least. And but it's important for us to know all of this and understand these diagrams, because over 1,000 trees are planted each year in Arlington alone, balled and burlapped. So we need to be aware of it. What we usually plant would be from containers, and then we have to spend a lot of time correcting those roots. And could you say a little bit more about how you would correct the roots of that one?
Yeah, but the one with the circle, I think it's just fine. The other one, if you have a hand pruners, you can prune off the woody roots, and then take a hand saw and cut, and we call it shaving, and you would just cut the entire outside of it off and the bottom. And it sounds really violent, but it's what's necessary, because if you don't do it, then the root mass is just going to put a layer of wood on and just strangle that plant. That they'll grow out, so that that's a myth that they won't grow out, but you need to take all of those off, because it will strangle them over time. So on the top, as you're digging down, you're going to need to go ahead and see if I can go back to the trunk flare. So if you're digging down here and you find what we call stem girdling roots, which are just circling roots really tight, you need to cut those off. entirely. A lot of times B&B, balled and burlap will have those as well. A lot of times all of these roots are all the way up here, and you've got to kind of peel them and cut them back to get down to this. The way that the nursery system is, almost all plants are grown in pots for their early years. They're called liners. And so sometimes you'll have multiple circling. You'll be circling in if you don't get them from a very good grower. So you'll have a pot bound 4 different times, all the way down to the center, and that's hard to correct. I have my computer plugged in, but it says it's going to die, so I'm going to try to come in on Zoom on my phone.
I love technology.
Yeah, it's I can tell you one other thing that's really fun, a fun fact, and I'm passionate about, and that is wire baskets.
Oh, yes. Tell us about wire baskets, because I've put that link to the in service that we listened to for them.
Yeah. So wire baskets, there's now some research and on both planting. So the complaint from contractors is without the wire baskets, the trees die. And the complaint from arborists that are dealing with mature trees is that you don't want a wire basket because it causes a flaw in the root system, because they don't really rust and break apart the way that you think. And so I've been for years, maybe 15 years, taking the basket all the way off. And how I do that is I have, while it's laying on the ground, snip the first ring off the bottom with bolt cutters. It's really easy. I can do it. And then put the tree in the hole. The basket is shaped like a cone. And so it's still holding the ball together. Sit it in, set it upright, facing the way I want it. Put a little bit of soil in to hold it. Then you take the snippers and snip down one side, straight down, lift the basket out, cut off the burlap except for what's under it, and then fill it and then plant it. Downside of this is that if you plant it in a place you don't want it, it's kind of, you're going to have to do the old style digging it up, and so it's more stressful. So hopefully you wouldn't do that. You wouldn't have to dig up a plant again, but that's the downside. But otherwise I haven't ever had a problem. But contractors, they really don't like to do it, but we are so the research is, one, it doesn't seem to matter either way, but there's no research on old trees. So, and I'll show you the only research that there is, if I can find it, is right here. You see, can you see this picture? Sorry. Can you see that that's got a basket?
Uh-huh.
So fast growing trees seem to be able to grow around them and be okay, but we don't know how okay, because this is as far as we've gotten with the research. So so that's all we know. We just don't know enough. And so I just take it off. It's not hard. It adds 2 to 3 minutes to the planting process. So not too bad. So we're gonna do it countywide.
Have you been able to, by putting that in the contract, to totally remove the basket? Will they charge more money to plant the tree?
About $1,000 per 900 tree, $1,000 to $2,000 per 900 trees. So that's not bad.
So
a
they're
very,
figuring it costs them $10 worth of time for every tree.
it's about 2 to 3 minutes. So it's very,
Yeah.
very small amount of time. And plus then all of that metal can get recycled. So,
Right.
Those are the things that I think it's just so important. Lastly, I didn't talk about this at all, but watering at home, if you're planting something, watering it when the hole's halfway full, and then when it's all the way finished is the best way to do it. Also, everybody talks about deep watering, but Bartlett did some research and they found that young trees establish the best when they're watered a little bit every day. And they do better than if they're watered a whole lot once a week. So in the county, we can't do that, but you can do that in your yard. And so that's the best way. And irrigation usually isn't enough for a bigger tree. So if maybe it's enough for a little tiny tree, but if you have irrigation in your yard, you always want to pay attention that the tree's getting enough, and most people over irrigate anyhow. So I see lots of questions popping in here, so I'm gonna go ahead and stop this share and then talk.
Yeah, there was a question about large tree species. Older specimens that come across fallen in the forest, you can see these huge root balls, and they're much larger than a typical wire basket. But that's what we don't know, isn't that right, Melissa?
Yeah,
Whether mature trees exist. Well, how long have metal
that's why
wire
arborists
baskets
are
been
on one
used?
side. So I think that things like wire baskets have been used for quite a long time, but they really came into heavy use, like heavy commercial use in the 70s, and it's because it really makes it easy to ship large quantities. That makes the handling much easier. Before that, everything was basket. Oh geez, I can't believe I can't remember that term. It's a special way of digging by hand and tying. My husband knows how to do it. There's a couple of local people, but it's really becoming a lost art. And so not many people can hand dig anymore, even know how. So, but Bonnie, that's exactly why arborists are on one side of this and the landscape industry is on the other side. And so it's because, but 2 minutes isn't really a huge investment of time.
No. And what do you think about tree gators? Tell us how one can water trees. Melissa, did we lose you? Oh dear. I think Melissa is going to try and be calling in again. Where'd she go? No. Anyway, tree gators. Those are those tall green things that they're to hold water that you see put around trees. And they're really good in many situations, like especially in a large, like around a school setting, for example. Say you've got 40 new trees surrounding the school, and the school maintenance guy can simply fill up a hose and go to each tree and hold the hose in that bag for 3 minutes and get enough water in it to supply it. So he can do that, once every 2 weeks and make sure that the tree is still getting water. The bad part about gator bags is that they should be taken off every winter so that the trunk doesn't get all sorts of nasty stuff on it from the bag being on it. And the reality is that there often aren't enough staff to take the gator bags off. So again, it becomes, if it's in your yard, yes, you should take the gator bag off every winter. If it's along a street, it may not get taken off. So it's one of those problems. And I think Melissa, hold on here.
I'm sorry about that.
Okay, great. Well, I'm making you the co-host anyway. I was just trying to explain about gator bags and the fact that they are great when they work. The problem is that if they're not taken off every winter, or if they're not filled up every week, they don't really accomplish what they're supposed to.
Yeah, a lot of people think that they've just been filled, and even our people sometimes, oh, somebody just filled them, they're helping us, but they actually drain faster than you would think, and so I think it's 3 or 4 hours, so it's not really that slow, and so typically if a bag's just sitting there full all the time, then it's clogged at the bottom.
Right.
I think of gator bags are a labor management tool. It makes somebody stand there long enough to fill it all the way up, and then make sure that you put the right amount in. And it does hold a little bit of moisture in the summertime, but that becomes bad in the winter. So.
But it's another one of those things that I don't see any need to have a gator bag in a residential yard, unless, again, it's the only way the person would be reminded to fill it up once a week during the summer.
Exactly. I mean, I think it's a choice, not a necessity. If you go out and I can try to find the publication that says exactly how much to water per hardiness zone per week. I think that there's a publication out there. I know there is. I just don't remember where it is.
Well, as summer comes on, I'll be looking at Casey Trees has an alert that they send out every week for where
oh, it's in your manual.
It's in our manual. Okay, there we got it. Yeah. Take your tree steward manual and read it. Okay, are there other questions about planting? Or about Arlington County's tree program?
So if we ever have a chance to plant bare root trees, it would be very interesting thing to try. And the reason why I say that is because pots make roots grow in ways that you don't really want them to grow. roots are generally grow out unless they're a taproot kind of plant, and they don't, plants don't make sinker roots very commonly, and so volunteer trees are really good, and also bare root trees.
What I think we will have an opportunity, because one of the trees that we're planting this Sunday is small enough that we can bare root it and put it in. But could you say a little bit about why, say, all of the street trees in the county can't be bare rooted?
It's just the challenge. So it's everything about the doing something at that scale is complicated. So bare root trees need to stay moist, but they don't want it, but they need to be planted very quickly after they get out of their growing medium. And so that's just very hard for us to do. So having soil around the roots gives us time. And that's all of the best practices that we just learned are just about how to more easily reduce stress on trees. So doing 900 trees, not all in a day, driving around the county and putting one here and one there, very difficult. Someday it may become easier because some places are shipping 3-inch bare root trees. So we'll see.
It is interesting because some places have figured out a way to make it happen, but it takes a totally different way to do it. But is it better to plant bare root trees? My personal belief is, in my yard, I want to plant a bare root tree.
Yeah, and the smaller trees, I'm sure the tree stewards know, the smaller that you plant, the faster that it establishes, the faster it grows. And all the research shows that little trees catch up and surpass big trees very quickly. But it's hard to do if you really want a tree, like a visual proof that you've done something. So yeah, so I encourage you all to come next weekend, and we'll try this and look at different ways to plant.
Yeah. We didn't really get into it, and it's not part of tonight's presentation per se, but in our tree steward manual, it talks about different ways that trees are planted in urban areas. And it used to be that any urban area would just dig a little hole, put the tree in, and put a heavy iron grate around it.
Oh.
And of course, as the tree grew, that became a problem. So then if you walk between Ballston and Roslyn on the corridor there, and look at all the different ways street trees are planted, it is a fascinating learning, because some of them, it's like we got smarter over time. First, they started planting them without those heavy cast iron grates around them, but they were still in little bitty tree coffins, is what they were called. And then it's like they started making the soil a little wider for the trees so that they'd have lots of room to grow together, and all sorts of ways that
Oh yeah,
they've gotten together. We'll have to.
I'm sure you guys all have read about that, but what trees are happier. Trees like to live in community. and instead of like little cages, individual cages, like specimens. And they do better. They do better if they're the same species growing together. And so you don't want to just plant all a monotype, but a few of the same species together is helpful. And then yeah, we're finding new ways to protect the soil and allow people to walk over root systems. And that just continues. But some of the newest research is so interesting because we're finding that all the design soils that we've been working on for the past 40 years, that the best thing is just normal mineral soil. And mineral soil is what's in the ground. So that's really interesting, that trees just prefer what's there.
Yeah, I'm putting into the chat about treefund.org, which is a nonprofit that has been started by a lot of arborists and universities, and they provide research to study trees, because what Melissa alluded to is that there really hasn't been long-term research on trees. And of course, to follow a tree for its life, you'd have to have 60 to 100 years. And they've only been really looking at it scientifically for maybe the last 20, I think, was whenever they started really getting into it. So the Tree Fund has research sponsored by universities, and it's fun to look at.
Yeah, Vincent and I were on a conference call with Susan Day, who is a major researcher, and she's at the University of Vancouver, I think, no, but she was at Virginia Tech. And what's really interesting is that she did a research on mulch, and she said, you know what, there's been a little bit of research, but nobody just did this huge mulch study of all these different kinds of mulch in their properties. Like, nobody had ever done that. So there's so many things that we do that we're kind of doing because it's always been done. And so we're learning so much. And if you want to know something even more interesting, is that soil biology has only been studied since the 1990s. So very, very new. So it's just to think that the world that we are so, maybe I would say we don't necessarily take it for granted, but it's just there every day that we know very little about it. So it's quite fascinating.
Yeah. Well, are there any other questions for Melissa, or shall we let her go for the evening? Oh, here's one. Do you recommend only planting native species? Oh, there's always one. In my park, yes. In my yard or on a street, I don't care. What's your answer, Melissa?
But I tend to try to plant native species, but I think that there's a whole bunch that are benign. But I think that the main problem in Arlington is, and we'll still plant between 1% and 5% non-natives, is giving up our very limited space for non-natives when we have so little space to plant in. And so So I would say that I'm not a hard and fast, and especially about we call them nearly natives, like Dawn redwood, not Dawn redwood, bald cypress, Kentucky coffee tree, yellowwood. None of that stuff is locally native, and I don't feel bad about that one bit. So I think that oftentimes I'm more challenged to just get something to live in some of these spaces. So that's the primary concern.
Yeah, I remember years ago talking with one of the naturalists for the county, and his comment was that he only wanted natives planted in our parks, but that what was planted down in Roslyn, he really didn't care about, because he realized that it was going to be so hard for it to survive. And one of the things he would say is no self-respecting white oak would live there. You know,
Yeah.
on a median in a tree. He said it would just commit harikari rather than be there, which was interesting.
Yeah, and yet there's a lot of really, really challenging niche places that some of our natives grow. And if we could just get those into production, but they're not available. And so that's kind of a goal of mine, is to start finding the the post oaks, and there's a little hackberry that is growing in the road in Alexandria that's very, very old. Those kind of trees, we need more of those. So we have some natives that grow in marginal conditions. We just can't buy them anywhere. So.
And there was a question here, is Arlington planting most trees around schools? And that's not really it may look like that, but it's not true. What's happening in Arlington is because they've got so many new schools coming in, and they are required to have a, 20% canopy coverage, or it all gets crazy, but there could be like 50 to 100 trees planted around every new school. And those are done by contractors that are building the school. They hire a company like Davy to plant it. So Arlington County, who Melissa works for, doesn't plant on school property.
Right. We plant in medians, right-of-ways, land owned by the county board that's not parks, and parks. So those are the and pretty much any building that's owned by the county board will plant on, and that does not include schools. Schools are separate.
Right. And all of the new buildings that you see going up in Arlington, those are all there to plant the trees by the developer of the building. And that's fought out in the site plan process, which if anyone is really into being a policy wonk and wants to know more about it, send Nora an email and I'll be happy to send you the places where you can find out about it.
Yeah, what the hard thing about that all is that sometimes allowing greater lot coverage gets us more trees, because the by right development has very low tree requirements. So by state law.
Yeah, someone just asked about that. And new houses that take out mature trees, is there a rule to plant replacement? yes, there is, but, and again, well, what I'll do is I'll send the information that I've put together about state laws and what it is. There are replacement codes and all of that, but it's never enough, in my opinion. But, you know,
Yeah.
I was outvoted when we tried to get it passed at the state.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the rest of the state, isn't quite as urban, so they don't feel it as much.
Yeah,
Tree
there's
credit.
a lot of questions coming in about permitting and building. And I think what, rather than trying to answer them, sending the information where people can look it up to get the background on what the legal requirements are would be better. And then later, after the training, if people want to have a session about understanding state laws and guidelines, then there are many tree stewards who have been through this and would be happy to to talk about it.
Yeah, and that's
And
probably better.
yeah, yeah, because you need to know a lot about trees. And I should say that next week, the talk about tree selection by species will also cover how you decide what species goes where.
Oh, good.
And there was a question here, one just came in about bark as mulch. And you said that it wasn't as good because it sheds water. But the bark as mulch isn't the same thing as the shredded mulch.
So the county's mulch is whole wood mulch. So that's a very unusual shredded mulch. You don't usually get whole wood mulch unless you get it from a municipal system. But if you buy bags of shredded hardwood bark mulch, and then you tamp it down really nice to make it beautiful, then it can shed water. And sometimes it'll also soak up all the water and not give it to your tree. So, like I said, chunkier is better. So pine bark is great mulch. Shredded pine bark mulch is good. I don't think that's so bad. I like it a lot, actually.
Yeah, someone asked about that shredded pine mulch.
Mm-hmm.
And someone asked about Arlington's mulch. Actually, the Arlington County mulch that you can get for free, you can either pick up the wood mulch, which is what I get all the time, or you can get the bark mulch. But you may have to go pick up the bark, not the bark, the wood chip mulch by itself rather than have it delivered. But you can get it.
Yeah, even we have harder time with the wood chip mulch. The leaf mulch is very good. It just gets really soggy because they grind it up so small. I don't have any info on Alexandria tree planting programs, but maybe Nora does.
Well, the actually Alexandria has a wonderful tree planting program, which is just going on now. The the arborist John Marlin, who started 2 years ago, is just top notch. I'm so happy he's there. And he's got all sorts of ideas of getting the program up. And email just came around from Bonnie. Yeah, Bonnie, you want to tell them about Alexandria?
Yes, and Nora had sent me a little message. I didn't want, everybody knows that I jump up and I bounce up and down with excitement, and sometimes I jump in, but it was kind of an invite. So yeah, Alexandria hasn't had the same like funding for the number of trees as Arlington. But anyway, and there's been some other issues with the urban forestry program, but John Marlin has been a breath of fresh air. Absolutely. And he's been steadily doing all the things necessary to make his case to management for changing the way things are done, and also to obtain additional resources. And those have started coming in. It's very subtle in the budget, how it's shown, but for this year alone, he's managed to get some resources to help his vision. But for years, Alexandria's tree planting program has been dominated by the resident request program. So, for example, the past, say, 2 years, Alexandria's had funding for about 450 trees per year. And first dibs on trees, if you will, has come from service requests put on the internet. I want a tree in front of my house in the mowing strip. And there's frankly, it's been the policy for so long that you just don't say no. So if someone lives in a neighborhood with lots and lots of tree canopy, beautiful trees in yards, 2-foot mowing strip, with other things in the way and power line overhead, you still give them a tree, you give them a red bud, you give them a flowering cherry tree. But meanwhile, like if you look at Alexandria's budget documents, and they have an updated, a very thorough canopy tree canopy coverage study coming out soon. Our canopy is about, the last in-house study was done was 32.5%. And so you have these resources that were $250 trees. One of the first things John Marlin did was renegotiate the contract for better quality, a number of material things in the specs, and 2 years of watering instead of 1. Well, now they're $500 trees. And so $500 going for a flowering cherry tree that might live 25 years. So somebody can say they have a pretty tree out front of the yard, versus the arborist being able to have more discretion in how their budget's used to put larger canopy trees, longer lived canopy trees in places that can support them more. So anyway, John's trying to change that and trying to go to a city staff initiative, proactive planting program versus just reacting to requests and feeling like you can't say no to them. And he has management support and recreations, parks, cultural activities. So let's see what else. And I think he's going to have funding for quite a few more than 450 trees this year. And he's getting those numbers up closer to Arlington's. Anyway, that's my short summary on what he's some of the things he's working on.
Right. And what we'll be doing is later in the training, we send information about how to get involved in the county, because it's not just tree planting, but a lot of times it's supporting the staff of the urban forestry. So we'll get info to you on that, but they are really coming up great. And we've got a couple of planting programs for trainees there, and other programs where you can talk to staff. So if there aren't any other questions, Melissa, I think we can let you take off and do whatever class time we need. Thank you very much. And I'll see you Sunday.
Okay. Take care.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.
So, okay, now you've heard about planting. Was there any class announcements that you wish to make, Catherine? Or
I think I made them earlier.